Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BioBus Student Town Hall Live. My name is Ashley, and I'm a BioBus scientist. Today, we're going to be talking about brains and what you can learn by studying a really cool animal called a cuttlefish that lives in the ocean. Let me tell you a little bit about what BioBus is and why I'm extra excited about today's town hall in particular. BioBus is an education nonprofit building a scientific community for everyone by bringing scientists and students together to discover, explore, and pursue science. So I'm actually going to answer the first question of the day, which I know is a little weird because I'm not the guest scientist. But Catalia, who is 8, asked us if the BioBus only takes you to the museum. Well, Catalia, the BioBus is actually a mobile science laboratory that travels to young scientists like you all over New York City. And these are the BioBuses here that are filled with microscopes for students to use and make their own discoveries. Some of you might have even been on the BioBus before. If you have been on the BioBus, let us know in the chat. Today, we're bringing you the first town hall in our series on science in Harlem. And you might be thinking, why Harlem? That's a good question. At BioBus, we have focus communities, and they are Harlem, the South Bronx, and the Lower East Side. These are communities where we see so much scientific potential, but there aren't enough easily accessible resources and opportunities for students to fully reach that potential. So at BioBus, we devote a lot of our resources to students in those areas. I'm actually a member of the Harlem team at BioBus, and so is Rosemary. You'll meet her in a couple minutes. We know that there are many communities like this, and BioBus is working to grow so we can bring science to everyone. So today, we'll be bringing you science happening in a research center called the Columbia Zuckerman Institute, where scientists study the brain. There are many other places where research is happening in Harlem, though, and we hope to bring you a little bit of science from as many of those places as we can. The Columbia Zuckerman Institute is also home to our community laboratory, the BioBus. This is where BioBus holds classes, public events, and where we do research with our junior scientists. So come visit when we get back to in-person programming. Today, we have a wonderful guest scientist with us, Dr. Tessa Montague, to answer all of our questions about cuttlefish, camouflage, and the brain. So let's dive into today's science topic. I want to first identify this mystery microscope image. Did you figure out what it is? This picture is actually a close-up of cells called chromatophores. These are a kind of cell found in animals like cuttlefish, and they contain pigments or a colorful chemical that help give these creatures color. Animals like humans, like us, have cells that contain pigments too. They're called melanocytes. But the cool thing about chromatophore cells is that they can change in cool ways that Dr. Tessa will tell us all about. So, Dr. Tessa Montague is a neuroscientist. That means she studies the brain. And she studies these sea creatures called cuttlefish in the lab. Her big question is, how does our brain let us see the world? So Tessa, welcome to the BioBus Student Town Hall. Can you please tell us a little about yourself and your work?
Sure, I'd be very happy to. As Ashley said, my name's Tessa. I'm a neuroscientist here at Columbia, but you may be able to tell from my accent that I'm not originally from New York City. I'm actually from London, England, the land of the Queen, though I'm not very royal myself. And I'm really interested in this weird and wild organism or animal called a cuttlefish. And maybe I'll tell you a little bit about why I'm interested in the cuttlefish. And I'll do that by showing a couple of slides to help you understand. I think maybe you can stop sharing and then yes, thank you. Okay. So here I have a picture of a human brain. And what you guys may or may not know already is that when we look at things with our eyes, we actually kind of like process that information and figure out what we're seeing using the brain, the big brain that's in our skulls. So let's say that in this case, a human is looking at an object like a traffic cone. Even though our eyes see the traffic cone, the part of our body that allows us to identify it and say, aha, yes, this is a traffic cone, is the brain. But the thing is that we can do some experiments in humans, but a lot of the experiments that scientists do is on other animals. And I decided that one of the coolest animals that we could study how our brain lets us see the world is actually the cuttlefish. And the reason why is cuttlefish can camouflage to the environment. And I'll show you some videos of them camouflaging soon. So what this means is they can change their skin color to blend into the environment. So it's a really amazing thing to watch. Most animals can't immediately change the color of their skin, but cuttlefish are one of the animals that can. And so what that means is that if a cuttlefish looks at an object like a traffic cone, which we saw a human just looking at, they look at it with their eyes, which are on either side of their body here. Then they process this information in their brain, which I've shown in between their eyes, because this is where it sits in a cuttlefish. Then what's crazy about it is they then create, they sort of recreate what they've seen on their skin. That's what camouflage is. You're taking what's around you and then you're putting it on your skin. So basically, a cuttlefish talks to us and tells us what it sees, but doing so with its skin color. And I don't know about you, but I don't know any other animals that talk to us. So I think they're a really amazing creature. And that's why I've decided to dedicate my whole life to studying them.
Wow, thank you so much, Tessa. I am so happy to have you here with us. And I think my cat Zoe would disagree. She definitely talks to me.
Oh, yeah.
But a different kind of talking, probably.
Maybe a little.
We also have another scientist with us today. A BioBus scientist named Rosemary is here in the chat, and she'll be collecting your questions. So if you want to ask anything in the chat, you can send them in to Rosemary. Rosemary, can you introduce yourself and tell us something you're curious to learn today?
Yes, I can. Hi, everybody. I'm Rosemary, and I am the one who is talking to you in the chat. So you're already starting to send in some really exciting questions that we're going to be talking about today. One thing that I am really curious to learn about is why cuttlefish make such good model organisms for a neuroscientist to study. So send your questions in and I'll be here to ask them to our scientists.
Awesome. Thank you, Rosemary. All right, let me tell you how this is going to work. So you all submitted some amazing questions ahead of time that I'll be asking to our guest scientist, Tessa. Shout out to PS 155 and PS 180, whose students submitted most of our questions today. I want to remind everyone watching that you can also submit your questions ahead of time for any of our student town halls on our website, biobus.org/townhall. And as always, we'll be taking live questions from the chat. So if you're curious about something, put it in the chat and we'll ask your question to Tessa. Tell us your name and your age too. All right, Tessa, here are the scientist rules. You will have about 2 minutes to answer each question. All right? So let's get started. All right, our first question comes to us from Karen, who's 8 years old. And Karen is asking, my question is, what is a cuttlefish? And if it is a fish, because of the name?
That is a great first question because I haven't even told you what a cuttlefish is. So what's really cool about cuttlefish is you might have heard of an octopus or a squid. Now, cuttlefish is kind of like a cousin to an octopus and a squid. So they're these weird underwater creatures that have 8 arms. They're actually not called tentacles, though you might think they are. They can change the color of their skin. They have really big brains, considering that they're underwater creatures, and they're very distantly related to us humans, very intelligent creatures. And they're also just really weird animals. So they have 3 hearts, Like we only have one heart, they have three. They have green blood, we have red blood, and they're just altogether strange creatures. And maybe I should, but the other part of the question was, are they fish? And actually they are not a fish. And that is because fish, well, there are a number of reasons they're not fish. If you want to know the technical term, they're called a cephalopod. But kind of like how a jellyfish isn't a fish and a seahorse isn't a horse, they, for some reason, just got given that name, cuttlefish, but they are not fish. But maybe I should take you so we can go and see a cuttlefish so you have a better idea of what I'm talking about.
Yes, please.
Okay, so I will turn my camera. So here we are in the cuttlefish lab at Cuttlefish University, Columbia University. And here we have the systems that keep our cuttlefish. Now I work on a special type called the dwarf cuttlefish. So it's very little. But let's see if we can see any of them. Oh, I don't know, they're hiding. But I think I see one here that might be, is it gonna swim towards us? So right now it's kind of difficult to see. It has, it's pointing its arms towards us. Oh, it's starting to come a little bit closer. Its eyes are on either side of its body. And right now it's making this really spiky texture. Oh, it's coming closer. It's coming closer. So there it is. I think it might think I'm a shrimp and it might be hungry. I'll show you a few other ones just so you have an idea of the variation. So we have some cuttlefish down here in the tank. And here is one cuttlefish. So it's kind of like a dark brown color. And there are some over there floating at the top of the tank. And then here's some other ones. This one's a little bit lighter in color. So they can change their color instantaneously if they want to. Now, whether they're going to do that for us right now, I don't know. Here's yet another one. And yeah, we'll see. We'll keep exploring them and see what they do.
Tessa, can I give you another question while we're looking at the cuttlefish?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I have a question from Malie, who's 9. And she's asking, how big are the cuttlefish? So these ones that we're looking at look kind of tiny, but are there other ones?
Yeah, these are, so as I briefly mentioned, they're called the dwarf cuttlefish. So they're the smallest cuttlefish species there is in the world. So at their biggest, they're like a few inches like this. You probably saw the maximum size. But then when they're babies, they're absolutely minuscule. So let's see if we can see some babies here. We have some that just hatched. Can you see the tiny little, they're like teeny little, about the size of my fingernail, just over here. Kind of a little bit difficult to see with the phone camera. But they are, yeah, when they hatch, they're the size of my pinky fingernail. And then they eat absolutely tiny little shrimp until they get bigger, until they get to this kind of size. This is not quite full size, but it's a couple inches.
Are there others that get bigger than that? How big do like the biggest ones get?
Yeah, so the Australian giant cuttlefish is the biggest one in the world. And it gets about this big and really heavy, like about as heavy as I am.
Wow.
And heavy. And every summer, thousands of them all meet up together off the coast of Australia. And they have a big party.
A cuttlefish party? Wow, I want to be invited. Okay,
I know.
Let's go to our next question. How does the cuttlefish survive? That question is from Marlon, who's 8. And then we have a follow-up from Camila and Rob. They want to know, what does a cuttlefish do?
Wow. How does a cuttlefish survive is a good question, because that is one of the really important things they have to do. And that's why they're able to change the color of their skin. So I think this might be a good time for me to show you a video of some cuttlefish so you get an idea of what they do. Now I have a wet hand. Uh-oh. Okay. So let's have a look at a video of, actually we're going to look at a video of an octopus, which I said is the cousin of the cuttlefish. So it's quite similar. And this will give you an idea of actually camouflage, which is one of the things they do. And then maybe you guys can guess why they camouflage. Okay, let's watch this video. Uh-oh, the video is not playing. Okay, well, what happens, I'll see if I can get this, pull up this video somewhere else. But basically, the animals are really, really good at disappearing into the background. And I don't know if anyone has hazarded a guess at why they are able to camouflage or why they would want to camouflage. I think I have the video now. Okay. So here's a video. Uh-oh. You're not seeing the video, are you? Okay. I'll try one more time, and if it doesn't work, then I will just describe it to you. Okay. So here we have an octopus hanging out. Can anyone see the octopus? I can't see the octopus. I don't think that fish can see the octopus, but in a second it's going to reveal itself. Whoa, how crazy is that? Let's look one more time. So you have a bunch of algae and rocks in the ocean, and the cuttlefish is somewhere there, but we can't even see it. And the reason we can't see it is because it's changing both the color of its skin and the texture of its skin to perfectly blend in with the environment. And then when it sees that this human diver is coming, it freaks out, goes bright white, squirts ink, and swims away. And so this is an example of camouflage, and it's one of the things that these animals do really frequently, and it's because they need to escape from predators, and so they have to hide. And the best way to hide is to change your whole skin color so nobody can see you.
And skin texture. That is so cool. Thank you, Tessa. Okay, our next question comes from Anaya, who's 9, and she's wondering, how smart is the cuttlefish?
That's a really good question. The cuttlefish are meant to be really smart. And this is partly because they have big brains, but it's also, they show that they're smart because they can perfectly blend in when they need to. And they also can learn how to do things. So you can even train a cuttlefish how to do tricks, and which is pretty cool. And one of the things that my cuttlefish, though I haven't tried to train them to do anything, one of the reasons I know they're intelligent is because they've learned that when I come over to the tank, like with this one that I was showing you earlier, they've learned that if I come here, it means they're probably going to get food. And so if they're hungry, they come to the front of the tank and they wait for me. They kind of beg. Now, can anyone think of another animal that begs for food? And do you think that's an intelligent animal? Let's see if any of these guys are hungry. No, they seem to be hiding, but I think these ones that float to the top of the tank, I think they know that, oh, they're just orienting their eyes. They just turn towards my finger because they think that something might be coming. And I can actually get one of the nets. So I'm going to feed the animals soon so you guys can see what that looks like. But it's these blue nets, which is how we usually feed the animals. So it's possible that if they see the blue net, they know that that means food. Aha. Do you see how these ones here just turn towards the blue net? And now they're all circling around it because they know that it probably means food. Let's see about these ones. Oh, they just turn towards it. But the cool thing about cuttlefish is they don't have to be very close to the food to catch it. And maybe I'll show you that soon. So they're all positioned to get food because they're very intelligent, because they learned that if they see the net, it means they're going to get food.
That is so cool. All right, so I think it's about time for us to turn to the chat. So I'm sure you all have a bunch of questions. So first, if you're just joining us, you're at the BioBus Student Town Hall. My name is Ashley. I'm here with BioBus scientist Rosemary and Dr. Tessa Montague, who studies cuttlefish. And we're taking your questions. Rosemary, can you tell us, do we have any chat questions?
We have a ton of chat questions. People are so excited. They're asking a bunch of questions that some we're gonna get to a little bit later, I know. But a lot of people are really wondering right now what cuttlefish eat. And how do they eat it? Because they know, for instance, that cuttlefish are both, Gina says, they know that cuttlefish are both predators and prey, maybe. So what do cuttlefish eat and how do they eat it?
That's a great question. So actually, one of the things about cuttlefish that makes it really hard for us to keep them in the lab is they're really, really hungry animals. And not just they're really hungry, but they will only eat live, freshly prepared food. So you can't just sprinkle some little fish flakes like you do for a pet fish. Instead, we have to feed them live shrimp. So let's take a look at our shrimp. Here's a tank full of, these are called grass shrimp. So they're normally found in the ocean or in grasslands. And we actually have to get these shrimp shipped from Florida every week, which is kind of crazy because there aren't many in this area. There are a few shrimp in the Harlem River, which we went to catch, but these animals get through thousands of shrimp every week. So how about we feed, oh, and the other thing to say is, so these are the shrimp for the adults, but we also have different shrimp for the babies. So these are little teeny shrimp called mysid shrimp that also come from Florida. But then these shrimp need to have their own meal. So we also have brine shrimp, which are even teenier. In fact, they're called artemia, tiny shrimp. So you feed these shrimp to these shrimp, which then get fed to the baby cuttlefish. And then the big shrimp get fed fish food, and they get fed to the adult cuttlefish. So how about we get this, we'll get the net again. We're gonna rinse it out so we don't hurt the cuttlefish. And let's take a scoop of shrimp. And I want to see if you guys can figure out how the cuttlefish are catching their prey. It happens very quickly, so you're gonna have to pay very close attention. And then let me get the camera ready for you to see. I'll put it here. Okay, we're gonna drop the shrimp and let's see what happens. Ooh. Do you see what happened? That might have been a little bit difficult. Oh, it's changing color too. This one might be going for it. Whoa, what was that? Something just came out of its face to catch the shrimp. Let's see if we can see it on this one. Oops, sorry, the light reflection. Whoa, what was that? Let's see, I ran out of shrimp. Let me get some more shrimp and show you. So now I'll tell you the truth. What's happening is cuttlefish have 8 arms, which are the ones you see, kind of like an octopus, but they also have 2 feeding tentacles, which they eject really quickly when they're ready to eat. And so they catch their prey using these feeding tentacles. So maybe we should look at an animal in one of these tanks. Let's see if we can get these cuttlefish to come and eat the prey. Maybe they're not hungry. How about this one? Oh, I think he already caught the shrimp before I could even show you. That's how quick they are. I can show you a video in slow motion later, so you can see exactly what's happening when they catch their prey. But it's very fast and very powerful.
That is amazing. Thank you, Tessa. So let's take one more question from the chat, because I know you're probably all going wild now.
Yeah. Let's see. I think, let's ask this question. How do they change color? Some people want to know how they change color, and this is a bigger question for later about how our brains are working, but why can they change color and we can't change color? So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what makes these animals so amazing at changing color is this thing called a chromatophore, which we heard from Ashley about before. And so I'm going to show you the principle of how a chromatophore works. Okay, so this is a chromatophore. This is a diagram of a chromatophore. And if I press play, you'll see that it's basically this thing. It almost looks like a sun that's expanding and contracting. So what actually happens in cuttlefish skin is these chromatophores are sacs of pigment. So they have like yellow, orange, and brown little cells on their skin. And they're surrounded by this star shape of muscles. And these muscles are controlled by their brain. So their skin is controlled by their brain. Pretty crazy. And what happens is when this chromatophore is just that tiny little orange dot, you basically can't see it from a distance because it's tiny. And so you just see the underlying skin, which is white. But if they want to make a different pattern, let's say they want to go yellow, then they would just expand all of the yellow ones on their skin and suddenly they go yellow. Or if they want to go brown, then expand all the brown ones on their skin, they go brown. But what's cool is they can also make all these different patterns. They can make stripes and spots and all kinds of different patterns. And on top of that, they can change the texture of their skin with little muscles that come up on the surface of their skin and go down. So that's how they change color. And it's really amazing. And very few other animals can do it.
Super cool. Thank you, Tessa. So let's go back to the questions that were submitted, but we'll get right back to your chat questions, okay? Keep them coming. All right, so our next question comes from Oliver, who is 6 years old. And Oliver wants to know, can they squirt ink? Kind of like that octopus that we saw.
Yeah, they can squirt ink. And I would show it to you in person, but I think it's better that I show you a video of this happening, because they basically do it when they're scared or upset, so I don't want to upset them. But this is an animal. Sometimes when we transport them, we put them into a bucket and move them. And unfortunately, this animal got a little bit scared, so we'll see what happens when it gets scared. Whoa! It releases a giant jet of ink. So let's watch that one again. So what's cool about these animals is they have this sac inside their body called an ink sac. And if they're scared, they can release this sort of explosion of ink. And then while, like this often happens if there's a predator there, let's say they're being chased by a shark, they release that ink. And then while they're in the cloud of ink, they suddenly change direction and pivot and swim in a different direction. So the predator sees the cloud, but just keeps going forward, thinking they're going to catch. Meanwhile, the cuttlefish is, jetted off in another direction. So it's really clever. I mean, I can't see the cuttlefish. I don't know if you can. Oh, there it is. So it's really cool.
That is awesome. And you can see how when he does that, it like pushes him away too. It really jets off. So I'm sure that helps too.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so now we have a lot of questions about the cuttlefish's brain. So Ariana, Giovanni, and Jaden, and I'm sure a lot of other people asked, how big is the cuttlefish's brain? And Chloe, who's 10, asked, what does the cuttlefish's brain actually do?
So the cuttlefish's brain is pretty small. If you want to compare it to our own brain, the cuttlefish's brain is like this big. It's teeny. It's only a few millimeters in size. But if you look at what animals a cuttlefish is most closely related to, like I said, that they're cousins to an octopus and they're really distantly related to us as humans. One of the animals they're most closely related to is a slug or a snail or some kind of little worm. And now those animals are not very intelligent and they barely even have a brain. They have a few brain cells and that's it. So by comparison, cuttlefish actually have like a huge brain for the size of their body and for their relationship to other animals. Now, what does the brain do? It basically does everything. So I just told you that the brain controls their skin. So imagine that if we could just change color, we could disappear just by thinking about it and our whole body would change. That's what a cuttlefish can do. And not only do they use their skin for camouflage, but they also use it for if they're feeling like angry or aggressive. So they can make a different skin color to communicate to each other. Maybe I'll show you some of those videos later. And then they also use their brain to remember things. So if you can, as I said, you could train them. Like my friend trained a cuttlefish to swim through a hoop. So then it will use its brain to go, aha, the hoop, and now I must swim. And they use it to figure out where to target their feeding tentacles to catch shrimp. They do it for all kinds of different things. It's a very important part of their body.
Whoa, thanks so much, Tessa. So our next question comes from Joshua and Laura, who are 8. So they want to know, what do they have in their brain and how does their brain work?
Oh, that is a very profound question. And I'm not sure I can even really answer the question. I mean, inside the brain is lots and lots of brain cells. These are what we call neurons. So there are thousands and thousands and thousands of cells all in this little brain. But I could show you what the brain actually looks like, because one of the things that we've tried to do as scientists here at Columbia is to build a model to image, like basically take photos of their brain and then make a 3-dimensional model of the cuttlefish brain so that we can understand what's in it. Like, what are the different brain regions? So I'm going to show you a video of the cuttlefish brain, or the model of the cuttlefish brain that we made. Okay, so here's a video. This is the cuttlefish brain. I mean, much bigger than it is in real life. And these are all the different brain regions that we figured out. And so one of the things that we can tell you about what's in the brain is you see these big orange oval shapes. They're almost like a fruit, an orange. So these are called optic lobes. Now, optic means eyes. So a huge part of the cuttlefish brain is used for vision, for figuring out what they see. And so unlike, say, a mouse or a cat that really needs its sense of smell to kind of navigate the world, cuttlefish primarily use their eyes to navigate the world. And so they basically, a lot of their brain is used to figure out what's coming through their eyes. And I'll just show you one other video. So when we are imaging and building this model of the cuttlefish brain, we also took lots of pictures with this really fancy machine called a magnetic resonance imaging machine to figure out what the entire cuttlefish looks like and what the brain looks like inside the cuttlefish. So now you can see the brain that I just showed you. And this is now the outline of the whole cuttlefish. So these are the big eyes on either side. These are the arms. And now we can see all the organs inside of the cuttlefish. So we had to figure out what organ is what. These cuttlefish actually have gills on either side of their body. Now, what does that remind you of? What animal usually uses gills? Yes, a fish. But as you asked earlier, a cuttlefish is not a fish. But it turns out if you want to breathe underwater, you need gills.
So cool. Thank you, Tessa. I figured we would end up talking a little bit about brains today. So I actually have a slide on my microscope right now that shows you what brain cells look like. And so these lines here are those neurons. And this is a brain of a mouse. So it's really cool to think about how a mouse brain, a cuttlefish brain, and human brains are all made of the same stuff. It's really fun.
Really
so let's
cool.
go to our next question. Okay. So Ona, who's 10, wants to know, what part of the cuttlefish brain do they use the most? And I think you kind of answered that a little bit, right?
Yeah, exactly. So actually, this huge part of their brain called the optic lobe is probably what they use the most, and that's to process all the information coming from their eyes. They also have a pretty big part of their brain is used for learning and memory, which we've talked about already. So we know that they can learn, like they can learn tricks, they can learn where their food's coming from, and then they can remember it and use it later. But a lot of the brain is really just a big mystery. So we know what some parts of the brain do, but we don't know what other parts do. And so that's why people like me are studying them, because we want to figure out, what is this animal capable of? and which parts of the brain does it use to do that.
That's so fun thinking about the stuff that scientists don't even know yet.
Most stuff we don't know.
I know.
I wasn't meant to tell you that.
Our next question is from Emmaus, who's 8. And Emmaus wants to know, how do you guys study the brain?
That is also a hard question, because the brain is obviously sits inside of the cuttlefish's head. So either we can do these, the 3D model I just showed you of the brain rotating. We took an animal that had just passed away, and then we took that tissue and we imaged it with this microscope, so then we could see what the brain looks like. But if we want to study the brain in the animal while it's actually alive and doing cool things, we have to come up with a different method where we don't take the brain outside of the animal. So one of the things that we do with cuttlefish is, I told you that their skin is actually controlled by their brain. So what's kind of crazy about them is, if we just look at their skin, we can basically see brain activity. Like when the brain says orange, the skin goes orange. And when the brain thinks brown, the skin goes brown. And so one of the cool things is, we don't even really have to study the brain itself. If we look at the skin, then we can kind of figure out what the brain is actually thinking. And so we don't have to take the brain outside of the cuttlefish at all.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so if you are just joining us, my name is Ashley, and I'm here with Rosemary and Tessa, and we are taking your questions about cuttlefish. So Rosemary, do we have any chat questions?
We have so many chat questions. I'm not even sure we're going to be able to get to them all, which is cool, because that means there's a lot more for y'all to research at home now that you're excited about cuttlefish. But we'll try and ask a couple more that y'all are really interested in. Like, a lot of people are wondering, how big do cuttlefish get? And some people are wondering, how long do they live? So you told us they can be different sizes, but can they get really, really big, and can they live a really long time?
Yeah, so cuttlefish, the biggest a cuttlefish gets of any species is the Australian giant cuttlefish, and it gets like this big. But for the species that I'm studying, it only gets this big. So there's a big difference in the size of different cuttlefish. The biggest animal closely related to a cuttlefish is the giant squid. And that is huge. That would be like the entire length of this room would be the size of that squid. And if you ask me, that's pretty terrifying. But I've never seen one in the wild, and actually no scientist has ever seen one alive. So only occasionally they've seen them wash up on the shore, and they've seen just how huge they are. So this is probably the inspiration for a lot of like scary movies that use squids or octopuses as like the scary creatures.
Didn't we find a video of one a couple of years ago?
That's true, actually. There was one video where like an arm came up, and they figured out, based on how big the arm was, how big the actual squid was. But for the most part, they live really deep in the ocean. So people don't manage to see them. They're just the stuff of nightmares.
So cool.
And then the other question was, how long do they live? So one of the really strange things about cuttlefish and squids and octopuses, so these are the cephalopods I told you about, is they really don't live very long. So even though they're really intelligent and they can do all these cool things, most of them live for just a few months, or maybe some, like the biggest species, maybe live for 2 years. So my little friends in the other room, they only live for about 8 months. So really not very long. But over the course of their lives, they grow from a tiny, tiny little baby to a pretty big adult, considering they only have a few months, and they do all kinds of cool things. And maybe I'll show you some embryos soon, which is what they do when the two cuttlefish mate and they want to make their children. And the children look pretty strange when they first make them.
Awesome. Rosemary, can we take one more chat question?
Yes. there are a lot of people in the chat who are wondering, how are cuttlefish brains and human brains different from each other, and how are they similar to each other? Because what a lot of people are interested in is this great question about, why would it be useful to study a cuttlefish brain? Can that tell us something about our human brain?
These are good questions. Yeah, so I would say in general, the cuttlefish brain is pretty different from a human brain. So at least in terms of all the names, maybe you've heard of like the hippocampus or something like that, which is like one of the parts of a human brain. There's no hippocampus in the cuttlefish brain. But we figured out that there are areas in the human brain that are required to see the world, like the visual cortex. Then there are parts of the cuttlefish brain that are required to see the world, called the optic lobes, which I showed you. So there may be areas that do kind of the same thing, but they look very different. They have different names, they're different sizes. But as Ashley pointed out, all of them are made up of the same stuff, which is kind of what's so crazy about it, is they all have these little brain cells called neurons. And just by sending electrical signals around inside there, you can do all kinds of crazy things. So why do we study a cuttlefish instead of a human? Well, one thing is that humans can't change color, so it's kind of boring. But also most science experiments, you want to be able to kind of perturb things and see what happens. And we don't want to do experiments on humans. So we don't want to, in some cases with neuroscience experiments, we'll actually like stimulate part of the brain. So we'll kind of like zap part of the brain and see what happens. And we'd never want to do that to a human because that wouldn't be considered ethical. But if we really want to understand how the brain works, it's important that at some point we do these kinds of experiments. So that's why most scientists don't study humans. They might study mice, or they might study fruit flies, which are these tiny, tiny little creatures. And I study the cuttlefish because they can do these really cool things like camouflage, but also we can do experiments on them that we couldn't do on humans. And the last thing I wanted to say is that we can also learn. So cuttlefish are so distantly related to us as humans that we just discussed. Our brains are built very differently, but they're so intelligent, having built their brains in a totally different way. So I don't know if any of you guys have heard of something called artificial intelligence, but it's the concept of like, if you build a robot and that robot can think and can do things, even though it doesn't have a brain, that's like artificial intelligence. And some people think that we could actually figure out how to build robots and things by studying something like a cuttlefish, because it has a really tiny brain, so it's a lot simpler than our brain, that can do really cool things. So maybe it can help us learn like how to create intelligence.
This is so exciting. Okay, so let's go back to some of these pre-submitted questions, and then we'll get back to your chat questions, okay? So I have a question from Adrian, who's wondering, is the brain of the cuttlefish what kind of allows it to camouflage? And then I know there's a question from Ife in the chat who wants to know if there's a certain part of the brain that is responsible for changing the chromatophores to help with camouflage.
Good question. Yeah, so there is part of the brain that's used to change the color of the skin. It's actually called the chromatophore lobe, which kind of makes sense. It's 4 chromatophores. It's a lobe, meaning it's a bunch of neurons or brain cells. And yes, so there are parts of the brain that are required to do these things. And we could see if we can get some cuttlefish to color change right now. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to get them to do it kind of exactly when I want them to do it, but let's have a look. These ones are sort of the easiest animals to play with because I can reach down over them. So let's see. I don't know if you can see the reaction this animal just had to me, but it can see my hand and it's wondering what I want to do. So because this one isn't very scared, I'm just going to gently go near it and we'll see if it changes color. And let's hope I don't drop my phone into the water. So right now it's just avoiding me. Seems like probably a good idea for a cuttlefish. You can see the pattern of this one. So this is like a black and white pattern, which actually I'm pretty sure means go away, which kind of makes sense. As I said, they can kind of speak with their skin. Whereas this one has like a dark brown and yellow pattern. So this one is maybe saying something different to me. I don't know what it's saying. I can't yet speak cuttlefish. So you can see that's like a cool yellow and brown color, whereas that one's the black and white. But this one's becoming more black and white, maybe because it also has decided that I'm not so welcome trying to stick my hand near it. And then this one's, yeah, another color. It's kind of got these stripes across its skin. So all of these skin patterns are being controlled by the brain and specifically by the chromatophore lobe.
So Tessa, there's a question in the chat about how many colors can a cuttlefish turn and what's the true color? I'm noticing a lot of them have that kind of yellowy brown pattern. Is that the true color?
I'm not sure I could say they have one true color. They can just make lots of colors, but they do have a limited color palette. So their underlying skin is white. We can kind of see this one's a little bit yellow, but this is a paler cuttlefish right here. So you can see it's kind of like a white color. And then the chromatophores just come in some colors. So they have either yellow ones, or some of them are yellow, some are orange, and some are brown. And so if they use different combinations of them, like I said, they're these tiny cells that can expand to make a pixel or contract. So this one right now basically doesn't have any of them expanded because you pretty much just see the underlying skin. But maybe if I go near it, maybe I'm trying to encourage them to change color without sort of upsetting them. You can see this one has some different colors on it, and it has a lot more of a spiky texture. So that's the kind of spiky one. And then this one's pretty smooth right now. But yeah, so each species of cuttlefish can only make certain colors. And normally it's like white, yellow, orange, brown. But there are some really cool species that can do like a really hot pink color, which is really cool. And also these animals have reflective cells that can reflect some colors. So we can't really see it now, but they also can sometimes reflect some kind of blues and greens. And so that helps them to camouflage to other colors. But it's a little bit more difficult to see that in this light.
Wow, that is so amazing. I love how they can change the spikiness too. Really
yeah,
cool.
Super cool.
All right, let's go back to Rosemary to get some more chat questions.
So Tessa, since you told us that the cuttlefish is a cephalopod, like the octopus and the squid, we have a bunch of questions about kind of things we know about the octopus. Can I ask you 3 questions and you see if you can help us out? So
do it.
From the chat, we want to know, do they have the suction cups like an octopus does? Can they ever run out of ink like a squid or an octopus? And can they stretch their body like we have seen octopus do? Can you tell us about the cephalopod family?
These are amazing questions.
Yeah, these are great questions. So the first question was about suckers, and I can confirm that yes, they have suckers on their arms. Now their arms are a lot shorter than an octopus's arms, so they don't have as many suckers, but they do have suckers, and we think they taste with their suckers. Now it can be kind of difficult. Let's see if we can get close enough to one of these animals. If I flip that's not sideways, is it? No, okay. It's going to go out of focus. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to see the suckers, but on the inside of these arms, they have a bunch of little suckers, and on the tips of the feeding tentacles, which they use to grab their prey, they also have suckers. But unfortunately, it's kind of something you'd have to see. We'd have to like pick up the cuttlefish and like turn over its arms, and it wouldn't be very happy with me.
Okay, that's
if I did that,
Google.
yeah, if I did that, it would probably ink which gets me to the next question, which is, do they ever run out of ink? All I can say about that is no matter what I do, they never seem to run out of ink. So we have previously, as I said, sometimes we have to move the animals like from one system to another, and we want to put them in a bucket. And then the animal inked all over the bucket. Then we moved it to a new bucket. Then it inked all over that bucket. And we moved it to a third bucket. And they can just keep going like that, seemingly indefinitely, forever. They will at some point run out of ink, but they have so much ink in their bodies that they will basically not run out. And the third question was, can they stretch their bodies? And they can stretch it quite a bit. So the cool thing about an octopus is that an octopus can completely move and shape its body to fit into like any space it wants. So basically the size of an octopus's eyeball is the smallest size it can fit through. So if we had an octopus like the size of my head, it could squeeze its whole body through something like this big. So they're really incredible how they can change their shape. And there are some videos on YouTube you might enjoy seeing, like of an octopus squeezing through a tiny hole on the deck of a ship to escape. Now, the thing about a cuttlefish is they have this thing called a cuttle bone, which is not really a bone, but it's a hard piece of calcium in their body, which helps them float. And so it's kind of like, I have one right here. Okay, so this is what a cuttle bone looks like. And so it's kind of like a flat, hard, almost like a shell. And actually people who have pet birds often give cuttle bones to their birds to chew on as a source of calcium. Now, because they have this hard sort of shell on the back of their skin, like under their skin, but on their back, they can't fit through such a tiny gap, which makes sense. But they can stretch their bodies, and they often do this when they're fighting. And I can show you a video soon of some cuttlefish kind of sizing each other up and stretching their bodies. They're as big as possible to prove how scary they are.
That's so cool. And I think that actually leads us into one more big set of questions from the chat here as we're coming down, which is you were talking about cuttlefish maybe fighting with each other. We had someone ask, is there a queen and a king cuttlefish? And I know we had a pre-submitted question about, do cuttlefish have best friends? So can you tell us anything about the social structure of cuttlefish?
Yeah, I certainly can. So maybe this is a good chance to contrast it again with octopuses. So the thing about octopuses is they're really like aggressive, and they are not very friendly to each other. So any labs that have octopuses, every octopus has to be in its own tank, otherwise they'll eat the other ones. So that's pretty freaky. Cuttlefish, on the other hand, as you saw, we have a bunch of them in the same tank. So they're kind of like friends, but they're not always particularly friendly. I don't think they are, we call them, so the question is about how social are they? And on the scale of social animals, I wouldn't say they're so social that they have like best friends, but they can tolerate each other. And I'll show you a video of along the lines of friendly or not so friendly cuttlefish. Let's look at a video of some slightly angry or aggressive cuttlefish. So what we're going to see here is this is one cuttlefish here, and I'm going to play the video in a second. And you're going to see a skin color, skin pattern that male cuttlefish, boys, put on their skin when they're really aggressive and they want to prove that they're sort of more powerful than the other male. And you'll see that even though we only see one cuttlefish here, there are some little gaps here, and there's another cuttlefish on the other side. So let's see what it looks like. Whoa. So this animal now, these are two males. They're sizing each other up. In terms of this question about stretching their bodies, they've stretched all the way up to try and be as big as possible. And this is sort of how they assert their dominance. So if you have like a group of animals, and usually the biggest male will be the sort of king cuttlefish. I'm not sure there's an equivalent queen cuttlefish, but let's watch that one more time. This is how they size each other up. So they take on this really strong, dark brown skin color. They fan their fin really quickly, and they stretch out and kind of size each other up. So that's just one of the ways they kind of talk to each other with their skin.
Wow, that is amazing. I wonder if they would do that if you put them in front of a mirror.
That's a great question. We actually have not done that with a mirror, because I once accidentally put kind of like a mirror in a cuttlefish tank. And let me just stop the sharing. I kind of put like a small mirror in a cuttlefish tank, and the cuttlefish leant over the mirror, and as soon as it saw itself, it jumped into the air. It splattered ink all the way up my body, splattered it all over the floor, landed back in the tank, and then inked all over the tank. So it was like jet black water. So I learned my lesson that day that a surprise cuttlefish is not a good experience for that animal. But sometimes when they're in their tanks, I think there's a little bit of a reflection in the glass. It's not like a shock like that was. And then they often will start like putting on their dark brown skin color and kind of like showing off to their reflections. So I think they do, they don't recognize it themselves, but they do get start showing off when they see them.
Got it. Okay, so mirror experiments are not worth it.
I don't think so.
All right, my friends, I think we are coming to the end of our student town hall, but you can definitely keep sending us questions, and we are going to do this again next week with different guests, so please join us again. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you for everyone who asked a question. They were amazing, and I learned so much. Thank you to our guest scientist, Tessa, for telling us about her work and answering our questions. Yay, thank you. So I want to just tell you a little bit more about how you can continue doing science with BioBus. So if you visit us at biobus.org, we have a couple different ways. If you want to join a live laboratory adventure with BioBus scientists this school year, tell your parents and teachers to check out our Discover at Home classes. We also have lots of experiments called our Explore at Home challenges that help you investigate science experiments. And then you can also join our student town halls. You can watch a past student town hall, or you can join us next week for our student town hall in Spanish, and the topic will be birds. So that'll be really, really fun. We have a lot more fun and interesting science ready to share with all of you. Learn all about these and more programs at our BioBus website, biobus.org. Check out the link in the description below. And you can follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using our handle at BioBus to keep discovering at home. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you, Tessa.
You're welcome.